Welcome, everyone. My name is Myles. I represent Speedball Art Supplies, but I also have this great kind of opportunity to play with their products, and I don't have to sell them. So I can tell you the pros and the cons and all the nice tricks at the same time. Just really quickly, so you don't think you're getting instruction from a complete stranger. I'm a printmaking professor at Winthrop University in South Carolina. I'm fairly new to the area, and I'm coming live to you from the McCall Center in Charlotte, North Carolina, which I just started as a artist in residence until Christmas, pretty much.
Oh, fun.
Very excited, lots on the go, and print is my thing. So 2D works on paper, works on fabric, color theory, wood blocks, laser wood blocks, the incorporation of technology, screen print, etching, and stone and plate lithography. So I'm all over the board. It's nice to meet you all, and thank you to Tara and Plaza Art Materials for inviting me today. For the most part, I'm going to be tilting down my screen so you can actually see what I'm working on, but I'm going to pretty much follow the game plan from the PDF pretty forward. Okay. I'm going to start with talking and preparing the blocks, talking a little bit about design preparations. I'll then go into the tools, and then we'll have a bit of time to actually carve together as well. So the way this was designed is that you could just watch the whole thing and do it in your own time. You could maybe carve and print one color, one layer with me. That's my goal for today. But you could also just speed ahead and do two colors, or just do half of your piece of fabric and always come back and finish it. Once I show you the general steps, you'll be like, okay, now it's repetitive. I got it. I don't need you anymore. Leave me alone. And I understand that completely. That's kind of it, essentially. So I'm going to tilt it down.
Everyone, please mute.
Yeah, if we could mute our videos, that would be great. Even though I like the laughter, so keep that up, please. I'm going to tilt down the screen. There are two views on the go. You'll see my hand over in one screen right now, maybe. It's just another side view, which might be helpful to see what the heck I'm doing. But 9 times out of 10, it's going to be this main screen right in front of you right now. Okay. I love questions. Ask them anytime you want. And Tara's going to jump in whenever appropriate. I don't mind being cut off. And I also don't mind repeating, rewording, whenever, because there's a lot of information, but as soon as you got it, you got it. Okay, I'm gonna tilt down, here we go. Dun, dun, dun. So the things that you should have surrounding you right now, most of these things are from the kit, and some are just random things that you should probably have at home, in the studio, in the kitchen, etc. You will have your pink Speedy block. Yours will be 4x6. We're going to cut that down in a moment. You should have your lino tools for cutting, and your blades should be in a little plastic bag as well if you think you're missing them. They usually get stored in the handle, so I'll open that in a moment. We're going to have a transparent extender base for our fabric ink, and you should have 2 colors, blue and red, I believe. Okay. If you didn't end up purchasing one of the brayers, I heavily suggest for a block this size, you go for the 2-inch. You can control the pressure a lot more with and get details with a 2-inch versus a 4 or a 6. But down the road, I do suggest you get my favorite brayer, which is the 4-inch. It seems to do everything, and it fits a variety of sizes. Today, I'm going to play with the 2-inch, just to let you know, okay? What else? You should have a pencil with you, some type of a blade, like an X-Acto knife or a box cutter will completely do. A scrap piece of paper for making your design on. And if you have one of the burnishers, that's fine. If you don't have one of these, I go to my favorite, which is usually the nastiest wooden spoon I can find in my cupboard. And yes, I also cook with this, and that's probably not safe or recommended. A ruler would be handy as well if you start doing some geometric shapes, which is kind of going to be what I'm going to go for this demo. And you may want some type of a mixing implement, like a putty knife or a palette knife or any type of mixing thing. And if you're in a pinch, you could use a paintbrush as well. Okay, I'm going to clear this and then we'll get going. You will need your
real quick, Myles.
Yep.
Folks are saying they didn't get the transparent extender base in their sample kit.
So none of this.
Well, I just want to make sure, because remember how I thought it was black and then
Yes.
it ended up being the extender base. Yeah, so it's the biggest tube. Thank you, Michelle. It's the biggest tube in the kit. I can't get this in here. It's the biggest tube in the kit. Myles just has the old packaging. So, oh my goodness, I can't get a focus on here.
Find it.
But it's a big, okay. If anybody is still missing that, please let me know. There should be 3 total tubes in the kit, a blue, a red, and then the large tube, which is the transparent extender. Okay. Thank you, Myles.
No problem. It's kind of funny that you're just looking at my hands. It's a good thing my nails aren't coated in like etching ink today. It's a good day for me. Yes, so if you're missing the extender base, it's really not the end of the world because the majority of the inks are already semi-transparent and meant for overlapping and for layering. But if you have the transparent base, you've got way more control. When I'm coming up with my design, I know this is going to be the trickiest part to see. Everything else would be easy. I am working to scale on a piece of paper, always, always, always with graphite, just a pencil. That's all you need. So I drew out the 4x4 composition that I want to work with. And then I went back to basics. What's white? What's black? Not even thinking about color yet. I label it BW, BW. The black area can be printed any color of ink that you have. The white is what you're carving away, and you're making the assumption that you're printing on a white surface. So I'm just going to assume that you're printing on white. If you're not, don't worry about it, but you're carving away what you want to keep the color of the surface you're printing onto. So today we're printing onto the 100% cotton handkerchief, which I believe is 13 inches by 13 inches or so. That's a white surface, obviously. We've got one right here for us. You should all have one of these. And before I forget, because I always do, there is a better side to print on it. One side has the hemline. If you flip it over, the more smooth side, we're going to be printing on that side today. If you print on the opposite side, it's not the end of the universe. Nobody's going to notice. But that would bug me to no end because I'm a really meticulous printmaker. Okay, so I'll put that aside for now. You don't need it. Back to this quick little sketch that I made. I like geometry. I like repeat patterns. I like tiling. The more simple your design is, I feel the more beneficial it will be when you print it en masse across an entire surface. So this is 13 by 13, a relatively simple pattern, but it still looks crazy busy. And I wouldn't want to put any more information on this. You can go as complex as you wish, but for sake of time today, I'm just going to do a few straight lines and a circle. So to make this circle, I think I just traced the bottom of one of the tubes of ink, for example, and I just used a ruler and eyeballed those straight lines there, just something that I liked. So this demo today is going to show you tiling. So printing one beside another, beside another, beside another. Down the road, maybe for a different workshop, you could make this into a repeat pattern by flipping your image, but that's more complex for down the road, okay? So I'm going to keep it pretty simple today. If you want to kind of multitask as I'm talking, this may be the perfect time for you to do so. So using your ruler and pencil, make yourself a 4x4 inch rectangle, square, perfect square, 90-degree angles, and give yourself a simple design within there. Because remember, if you make it crazy complex, you have to carve it with little tools. So don't make it overly hard on your eyes or your hands or your wrists. While you're working on that, I'm going to talk a little bit about these Speedy Carve blocks that we have. Yours are 4x6. I've already cut this one down to 4x4, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But I want to give you some options as well when we're looking at these tools. So this is the one we're using today, is the pink Speedy Carve. It is the softest out of the available lino variations and carving surfaces. I like it a lot, mainly because it's easy on my wrist, it's forgiving, and it accepts graphite really well. So I'll show you how to transfer your image to it. It's really, really simple. There may be a project that you're working on where you want to use something a little more stiff for more detail, more crisp lines. You might want to use the blue, and then the mid-ground is kind of the yellow, and it comes down to personal preference. So I can't really say one is better than the other, but I will say that most of us learned using the battleship gray, probably in school or, I don't know, some community center. Just like flooring, it's affordable. It's pretty versatile, but it's also really hard. So you're going to be pushing a little bit harder when you're carving through it. I don't love it, but I see benefits for it for various reasons. Some top tips. If you have really old lino laying around, mount it to like a little piece of MDF. So if I turn it to the side here, you can see it's more stable, just literally glued to a more hard surface. Because if you drop that and the right temperature, that will crack and that will dry out over time, just like lino flooring does. I'm going to suggest that if you're using this and only this, warm it up a little bit by putting it in direct sunlight, and it kind of softens up the material so you can cut through it a little bit easier. You could also rub a little bit of vegetable oil on it and it softens it up as well. All these little tricks that I wish I was told when I was destroying my wrists and getting carpal tunnel in university trying to carve these. However, today we've got the very forgiving and very generous pink Speedy Carve to work with. So your 4x6 block needs to be cut. And I'm going to demonstrate on a little smaller block just to show you what to do and what not to do when carving. I'll move this a little bit closer so it's a bit more relevant for you. Your blocks are pretty big and substantial, but they do have a little bit of movement to them. So when you're carving, I like to score it once lightly and then do maybe 2 or 3 passes with just my straight edge and my blade. There's no front, there's no back, but you do need to measure 4 inches, 4 inches, and then do your cut.
Myles, while you're doing this, Barbara's curious if you can use both sides of the pink block for 2 separate carvings.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it comes down to you realizing how deep you start carving your first side image. So if you're doing something really shallow and you're not diving all the way through and hitting the table surface you're carving on, I think you might be able to get away with it for some things. You just have to be careful. Like I've seen some people want a guaranteed white area and literally just cut out the middle because they don't want that to print at all. So if you're very careful, the answer is yes. Would I do it as part of like a general practice? Probably not. But to save your materials, yeah, give it a go. Absolutely. That brings up a good point. So we're doing like a square today with straight cuts. You could also cut it with a decent pair of shears if you wanted some type of an organic shape or a rounded edge. So you don't need to necessarily have square, rectangle, etc., etc. You could also have multiple pieces that you then puzzle piece back together. So you could have one block, print that in blue, have another block, ink it up in red, bump them up together and print them at the same time, for example. When I'm cutting this, you are not using much force at all. I'm going to give it a gentle score. But you'll see it feels just like the pinky erasers. So it has a bit of movement to it. And then I'm going to do a second pass. And it should be pretty clean and clear and gorgeous like that. Okay, let me know if you're having any troubles with that. Try your best to do a 90-degree angle. You don't need to bevel it at 45 and get all technical and fancy with it. Straight edge, 90 degrees. Okay. You shouldn't have to push too hard.
Hey, Miles, Carolyn is asking, why are we cutting it down and not just using the 4x6?
I don't think they sell. Oh, well, we're doing a square composition and a square pattern for this. So I like squares. You could do the 4x6 if you prefer. I would rather have the offcut to use for something else. For example, my offcuts are usually quite large and I can do smaller little pieces and something else with them. So yeah, it comes down completely to what your design, what your pattern wants to be. If you want to do 4x6, go for it. Absolutely. Any other questions about the general cutting portion? Okay. So we're speeding ahead already. I've got my block exactly 4x4. I've got my design, which is 4x4. I like squares. They just, I don't know, they make me happy. The easiest thing to do now would be to cut out your 4x4 square. I'm just going to quickly do that. Again, with my straight edge, scissors, whatever. This does not have to be perfect. And this is getting a little meticulous, right? And it's however you want to work. What's your practice like? I like technique. I like process. I like clean edges. If that's not for you, you can ignore half the things I'm saying right now. You'll stress me out, but that's fine. And I know it's graphite and it's a little difficult to see. You could use a softer pencil if you want to see it better, but you don't want to transfer too much onto this, your carving block, because it will just smear and move around. So I like to use either a mechanical pencil, for example, they're pretty handy, or just a harder lead graphite that you're using, okay? Anything works. So this really simple geometric pattern is just so I can carve it within our time limit today. And you can go to town, you can take your time. And I really suggest you do, right? Because you want to get the most out of these blocks if you're going to be putting all this time into printing them. The beauty of the graphite and the beauty of the Speedy Carve pink blocks are that the blocks accept graphite exceptionally easily and exceptionally well. If you end up drawing directly onto your block, that's another great option for you. Go ahead, do it. Just know that you will be covering up or carving away the majority of information that you put on there. So if you make a little mistake with your drawing, don't worry about it. You won't be able to easily erase it necessarily. It will scuff, but it will not print, especially if you're using a dark color, okay? And I'm going to probably start with blue today. We'll talk about inks in a little tiny bit. Transferring your image. You don't have to worry about reversing or mirroring your image like you do with other print processes. So if you're working on an etching plate and you want to incorporate text, for example, you need to mirror image and write your text essentially backwards, from right to left instead of left to right. You do not need to do that with this process. You design your design exactly how you want it to print because you're placing it down to transfer it. And then when it prints again, it's going to print back in the right direction. So that's a really nice way to let your brain kind of relax for a little tiny bit. Transferring this image, you could tape it down if you don't want it moving around too much. I like to use the back of my carving tool, the rounded portion. And you'll either have a blue one or a red one of these. And I literally just do little circles where I know my design is. Check that I'm pushing strong enough to see my image come through. And if you're not pushing hard enough, push a little bit harder. It's pretty forgiving. If you don't feel comfortable using this, you could use that wooden spoon. You could use your fingernail. It's working. I've also transferred this once before, so it's less vibrant than it was the first time I did it. Because I'm prepared and I tried everything in advance.
You are Superman.
I do what I can. I do what I can. It's faint on mine. You probably can't even see that. I prefer it, but if you're transferring over yours, it will go a little bit darker for you. I'm going to reinforce some of these lines just for your benefit, essentially, on the camera. And you can just sketch on it. Are you doing a meticulous design? I don't know. Are you following mine perfectly? Maybe. That's a nice compliment, no pressure. Okay, and then I've got like, when I show this to students, for example, I like to give them the block and the inspiration and visuals, and then give them like 3 days to just walk away and just to sketch directly onto the block. And then they come back and they make the most incredible marks when they're carving it out. So take your time, whatever you end up doing, end up with some type of a light transfer onto your block. How we doing so far? Give me some thumbs up or some nodding heads or something. Yes, thank you. At the beginning of the pandemic, when I had this little black screen staring at me, it was so depressing. It's great to see faces. Do y'all mind if I continue talking maybe about tools while you're working on designs and cutting and transferring?
Go for it.
Okay, I will.
Actually, Helena wants to know, what would the lucite brayer be good for?
Are we talking about this?
Not the Baron, the brayer, because the brayers come in like hard rubber, soft rubber.
Oh, right.
Lucite. So what's your
Oh.
preference and why?
You know what? Like, maybe I'll pop this up just for a quick second while we're working because you can see my face. I don't use them a lot. They're very good for working on harder surfaces. I've seen people use them for smoothing out clay, for other things. I don't use them. I'm sure you could transfer an image, like it'd be fine for just rolling for general pressure and like kind of a condensed area. I always use a brayer that has a durometer, which is kind of the sponginess of the roller itself. A durometer around 45 or 60, because I need a little bit of cushion, like a little bit of bounce with it. And especially if you're using oil-based inks or the Akua water-soluble soy inks or the fabric block inks, you need that little bit of give, or else you're just going to slip and slide all over the place. Yeah, I don't use them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that generally, I mean, lucite, is sort of a throwback to when people were mounting a lot of stuff, and it is really good for
Getting bubbles out, right?
Yep, 100%. Yep. And it sounds like your preference is the soft rubber, which totally makes sense. That's the lighter color one, the tan one that you were showing earlier. Someone else is asking if you could do sort of a close-up demo on putting the blades back in the handle, because
Absolutely.
they took them apart, and I know how that can be when you first start out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just going to dive into talking about the individual blades, and I have a few little tricks that might work for you. But yeah, they're a little finicky at times. But I've got some tricks to show you right now. Okay, back down. Oh, look, my name's even on it. That's lovely. I'm going to prop it up a little bit so you have an even better view. Maybe that might help. Okay, so I'm grabbing my tool. Normally your blades are going to be in the base handle here. So I'm just going to unscrew, dump them all out. Depending on which blade series you may have 4, you may have 5 blades, you may have 6. You don't usually need that many or that much of a variety. but I'm going to talk about each one individually. The number one blade, which I realize it doesn't help if it's propped up at all. The number one blade is the skinniest, most detailed one that everyone gravitates to because you're all perfectionists. Okay, so that's the skinny, skinny, skinny number one blade. And it has a little number one actually written on it, and it's really hard to see. I rarely use this one unless I'm doing some last minute little tiny cleaning up. You have a V-gouge on it, and it is really small and not very deep, which means it's very easy to cut the blocks improperly. And I'll demonstrate that in a moment for you. So that's the number one. The number two blade is a V-gouge as well. And it's the most popular one, I would say, the most versatile one as well. I'll use this primarily for this demonstration today. The number three is a U-gouge. So very similar to the number two. The only difference is that it's slightly rounded. It's good for clearing big areas fairly quick. Okay, so big areas you don't want to print, reach for this bad boy. Which one is this? The number five is just, I like to call it, it's the same as a U-gouge, it's just a little wider. So you could do even more deep, quick carving and quick material removal with it. I don't use it very often. I find that I just stick with the number two a lot. So that's me, that's my technique. Those are my designs. You may think otherwise. You may have a different blade in there that looks a little bit like a trench. That's the number four. It's just another tool that has like a little wide trough for you to funnel through. You may also have the number six, which is essentially like, it looks like a little flame. It's the blade. And I'll give you some little tips and tricks of how to use that. You could also use your straight blade as well, you know, your box cutter, etc. It acts in a similar way, okay? So yeah, I'm always keeping my tools for the most part in the very back here. If you're lucky enough to have more than one, maybe you just have one tool for each, one blade for each tool that you have, just so you can quickly grab and go. I'm going to take the entire thing apart and show you all the internal workings. There should be two little bullet-shaped pieces which are inside the tip of the main metal attachment, okay? They look like a bullet shape. There is a rounded edge and a flat edge. You're going to put the rounded edge within the trough, and it should slide on itself, just like so, okay? So the flat edge, the rounded edge, and it is the rounded part that you then put down into the tip of the tool and just let it float around in there. I then lightly take the handle and screw it in maybe just halfway. You need to keep that loose. Okay, so it is loose and it is shaky and it looks unstable. Perfect time to put in your blade. I'm going to grab the number, let me grab the number 6. Where did I put it? It's right over here. The number 6 blade. And if you look down into the tip, you will see those two little components. You want to slide the base of the blade between those two. So right now it's in there and it's loose still. Then you're going to twist and tighten everything up. The blade should go all the way down to the base and it should be snug. If you have it sticking out really high, for example, and it's unstable, I'm terrified for you because as you start to carve, it could, you know, fling off and hit you in the eye. Okay, so make sure that is nicely snug in there. Having said that, there's always a few little issues, and it's usually with the number one skinny one that you should rarely be using anyhow for the most part. So to take this out, I'm going to loosen the tip. I like to give it a tap to let everything shake a little bit, and then it should just slide out with a little wiggle quite nicely. The number one, I'm going to do the same thing. It's loose. tap it in there. See, it's already being a problem, but it's looking good. It's looking good. It's all the way down to the base. Tighten, tighten. Tighten. Okay, snug again. You don't want it moving while you're carving. This is the one because it's so delicate and skinny and detailed. It's been pinched a little bit. It still fits and works absolutely fine, but sometimes when you're trying to take it out, it doesn't want to come out easily, like right now. So what I would normally do is unscrew the whole thing, give it a little tap, give it a little wiggle. Uh-oh, uh-oh. See, it's good that it's happening during a demo. And I might even pop. You could get a little pair of pliers, but a little bit of wiggling, a little bit of patience, and it does come right out. Anyone have any horror stories about these? I love them personally.
I mean, aside from the scars I have right here.
Just as I put this number 6 right back in, like I did, I had 120 middle school students this summer doing this process. And I was quite proud that only 12 of them stabbed themselves. I thought that was
that's amazing. Oh, wow. That's a great percentage. That's much lower than I ever experienced. Barbara, can you unmute yourself? Is there something specific you wanted Myles to demonstrate again?
Yes, I have taken everything out of the tip and I have no idea how to get it. It's not fitting any way I can do that.
okay, no problem. Let me take
I have
this one.
3 cutting, and then the pieces that came out of the tip are only one is like a part of a circle, and the other one's stuck together with the middle piece.
Okay. Do you have these 2 little bullet shaped pieces in front of you?
Are they concave?
One's concave, one convex.
No, because it's sticking to the middle piece. There's like, I don't know how to explain it. There's a middle piece that's solid metal, and then there's a piece around it that's stuck to it, and then there's another piece that came off.
I've got the same thing.
Okay, if you're looking
Not
at
coming
the one-
apart. They're not coming apart.
There is one that looks like it should come apart, but it doesn't.
Let me
This-
see. Maybe that's it.
That's it.
Oh, yeah, that's what I have. Okay.
Aha, that's
Yeah,
it
I
then.
have
Okay.
that.
So
Good.
that should be looking exactly like this. It
Yeah,
just
I
won't
have
come
that.
apart. And then you have the second piece. And
Yes.
you're just gonna put that right over top of it. And it should
Oh.
slide together.
Yes. Okay, I have that, but I still don't know how to use this and the blade to put it in the tip.
Yep, here we go. So you have a rounded side and a flat side with this.
Yes.
bullet. The rounded point goes down into the main attachment
Right now.
right now.
Put it in. Okay.
So those 2
All right,
pieces
I
should
got
be
that
in
in.
here. Then you're gonna screw on the handle before you even touch the blade at all.
Oh, okay. I know
And
I do.
then flip it right side up,
Oh, but don't screw the handle too tightly. Okay.
just halfway, yeah.
I
just halfway.
completely missed all that. Okay.
That's okay. Just halfway, and then they should be loose, and then your blade is what you're gonna be putting between those 2 little bullet shapes.
On the side or just anywhere on the side?
Kind of in the middle, it just naturally falls into place.
That's not happening.
Give it a wiggle.
No. Oh, I'm using the wrong side.
Ah, there you go. There's the
I'm
blade edge.
I'm
and
a
then there's
true
the-
idiot. Sorry.
No, no,
Okay.
you're fine.
I got it. And then you tighten it.
You got it.
Oh my God, thank you. That helped me so much. I hope it helps somebody else in this group.
This is good. This is good. I'm gonna
That's
put the
so much
number-
better. Thank you so much.
Hey, no problem at all. That's kind of why we're here, right?
That's just full. Okay, thank you.
So I'm putting the number 6 right back in, which is just a blade. But I like it because it looks kind of fancy, like a flame. What I'm going to do is just show you some little tips and tricks for carving, starting with the blade. I'm going to go right onto the pink block. And my design, if you remember back to my original kind of demo image, has lots of straight lines going on. So why the heck wouldn't you want to use a ruler when you're cutting it to guarantee that it's absolutely straight? So what I'm going to do is score all of those straight lines, And I'm not going to go through very deep. I'm going to aim for maybe half. And you don't even need to go that deep when you're carving either, but I'm just going to do it just to show you. And it's a gentle little pull. And, you know, let's go back to like, you know, school 101. Try not to stab yourself by carving in the direction of your body. If there is someone sitting in front of you, you don't need to give it a lot of pressure and you don't want to skid across the surface that you're working on, right? So after this, I'll show you the bench hook, which is another little option for you to kind of control your movements. But pressure-wise, with me scoring, I would say it's the same pressure as opening an envelope, the same pressure as, I don't know. I don't even know. Not much. The technical term is not much. So I'm scoring. I'm just scoring because I know I want those to be very straight lines. If you want something more organic, you know, trust the movement of your hand. But I'm just going to score some of these for now. And it'll make more sense once I actually start carving with the other blades, okay? Now, before I forget, because this is really beneficial for bigger blocks, you can get a bench hook, which literally just hooks over the end of your table. And I'm going to demonstrate it right now for you. And you can put your block on it. Let's see if this works. And you can hook it to the edge of the table. And when you're carving, you have nowhere to go and your block is not going to move. This is great if you're carving on something harder, like wood or linoleum. I find that you don't really need it for the pink Speedy Carve because they're a little tacky and gummy and they stay in place. Okay. I'm not going to use one because it's in the way. Back to it. So I've made these kind of scores, which you can't even see until you gently bend. And you can see your kind of leading marks going on there. I want them to be clean, and that's one really beneficial way of making your lines clean. You can bend it a little bit and then carve away one of those lines in between. I'm going to switch to that number 2 tool that I love so much, the V-gouge, and show you exactly what I mean. Da-da-da-da. Here it is. So I've loosened my tool, loosened my tip, and I'm just going to slide the new one in. Twisty, 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 twisty. Okay. I'm going to get rid of this green surface if you don't mind, because I like clean white surfaces because I'm one of those people. Bam, gorgeous. Okay, when I'm using the V-gouge and the U-gouge, you're obviously pushing away from yourself. Lots of people, this bothers their wrists and bothers their fingers because they're only pushing with their wrists. Please give yourself a little bit of, put your body into it a little tiny bit and put your thumb behind the tool. Your thumbs are powerful. Your other fingers are a little weak. I'm going to suggest that you hold it similar to this with your hands behind the tool and you have one thumb behind and you're pushing with your arms and your fingers are just guiding as you go. Like all my fingers are flying around, like I know exactly where they are. They're not going to get cut this way, etc., etc. When I start carving, I'm kind of going down a little bit just to start it off, and then I level it out and continue pushing forward. And there is hardly any pressure, and I'm going slow until I'm comfortable. You can stop, you can readjust, and you can go right off the edge. And because I had that leading line there, it did stay pretty straight overall. I can go back in and clean up that. See what I mean there? I can go right back in a different direction and clean it up to make it that original scored perfect line. That's deep enough. You do not need to go any deeper than that. When I got to the edge, this is one thing about the blocks that I don't love. Because they're so soft, it's difficult to get a straight cut right off the edge. So the solution for that is literally just to turn it around and carve it from the other direction to clean that up. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to go in from the side and clean it up like so. You could also turn the V-gouge a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left to get a deeper cut and to really focus the blade. Because you essentially have two blades which are put together into a V shape, right? So maybe you could look at it as just one blade on the left, one blade on the right, and focus it where you need it to be focused. Circles 101. Move the block, don't move your tool, okay? So if you have a controlled surface, I'm gonna try it with one hand, one finger, we're gonna go from there. I'm gonna start it by dipping it in a little bit. I'm gonna push, I'm gonna turn my hand a little tiny bit. I'm gonna rotate the block and go with it. As soon as my fingers are in the way, I'm pausing, I'm moving. I've yet to cut myself during a demo. I don't want this to be the first one. And if I do it, I will not confess to it. Not going deep again. This is a weird looking circle, but bear with. Slow and steady.
While you're finishing your circle, the question is, if your line is curvy, would you still use the number 6 blade to score the line?
You know what? It depends on you. Like, I feel like I would freehand it and wing it because at the end of the day, you're doing a hand carved block and it's going to look like a hand carved print. And let's totally embrace that. If you want a digital curve, Illustrator is your best friend. Is that a terrible answer?
No, I don't
No?
think so.
Okay, good. So, two things to kind of point out are you could go too deep when you're carving this. So let's look again at this number 2 gouge that I have. Your blade is fairly deep and fairly tall. You don't ever want to go under the surface and kind of tear it and come back up like a whale coming up for water, right? You don't want to tear the surface, and I'll show you what it does. So a good clean cut versus, and I'll show you closer in just one moment, versus one that's too deep, comes back up. Can you see the difference? This one's looking pretty hot. This one over here, oh, well, reversed images. It's tearing the surface and it won't print cleanly. It will look a little rough. But if you want texture like a porcupine, you go for it. Another suggestion for you is when people start carving these blocks, they do little tiny cut. And it's infuriating because it costs you like so much time. Try to go for longer, cleaner, consistent strokes. And that will save you a lot of time and a lot of energy. And it will remove the information and the materials faster for you. So before I go into other stuff, I'd love to give you all some time to just transfer images, carve, give it a go. Let me answer some of your questions. Let me have a sip of water. And then we'll dive right into talking about the inks and actually printing something, if that's okay with you.
Sounds great to me.
Like, I can talk while you're doing that as well, so don't feel like you can't ask me questions, etc.
I'm gonna take a water break too.
I can tell you stories and entertain you while you're carving away.
Well, I do have some questions, but you're entertaining enough as it is. So when you're trying to be, if you are going to be intentionally entertaining, like take it up a notch, I'm all for that. Okay. So we have any tips for carving an outline shape like a triangle?
Yeah, so a triangle would be a relatively good one to do because you can use straight edges. So use your ruler, do the exterior of the triangle first, and then measure in how thick do you want that triangle shape to be. Maybe it's 3 millimeters. You're essentially drawing a triangle within a triangle, and I would go right in with that number 6. If you happen to overcut a little tiny bit, it's not the end of the world, just don't carve it out. So if you're doing a straight edge and then like an X, another straight edge, but you want to just stop just before you get to it, and it goes over a little tiny bit, it's fine. It's still touching. Ink will not be that sensitive. It will fill in that little tiny gap for you. So you don't have to worry about straight edges not printing.
Miles, I just wanted to show people, I cut this out of one of these easy cut blocks, the pink eraser. So you can even actually make a shape from it.
Oh, so physically changing the shape of your block, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. One of the first assignments that I usually give my first year students is you're not allowed to do a rectangle or a square. You have to physically change and make an organic shape. I think I let them have 1, maybe 2 straight edges. And it just switches up the whole conversation and the imagery, and it makes it way more interesting, way more diverse. I'm always trying to break out of the rectangle. Another benefit for using that number 6, and I know I'm kind of harping on about it, but I think it's a good preparatory blade to use. If you wanted to abruptly stop a carved line, for example, I've got this straight line here that I just carved. We did the number 6 all the way down. You can then carve up to it, and it kind of acts as a nice little ditch or a barrier, and it stops your blade from continuing onward. And then when you take out all those little side cut pieces, you have a nice cut edge. Gorgeous. After we cut out the circle, what should we clear all the area? Okay.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
would you please repeat what you just said?
Yep,
I didn't quite understand that.
Absolutely. I just want to stop Nancy from cutting the wrong thing first. Give me 20 seconds. Nancy, if you're cutting the exact same design that I followed, let me get this up here. So this is the circle that we just did. I went around it. Don't carve out the circle, carve out the space behind it. We want the circle to print. So you're carving away what you don't want to print. If you already started doing that, maybe do the opposite of me. That's awesome. Why not? You know, you don't have to follow this to a T. Absolutely. But I'm happy I caught that early. So what I was saying before is, like, all these little scored lines that I made originally as kind of just a straight line guide to then carve out separately. If you wanted that straight line to be there, for lack of a better word, permanently, and you wanted to carve away all of this side, this little triangle piece, for example. So I'm carving up to it and I'm carving up to it. If you have a line there scored, that scored line kind of stops the blade. You'll feel different when you hit it at that location. And then all these little side pieces just come out really cleanly. And this line is like your ditch, and it stays completely clean and straight. It's just a little trick to keep it clean and geometric, I suppose, if you're going for like a really straight cut look. Did that help a little tiny bit, I hope?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you.
It's always great when people say, no, I still have no clue what you're talking about. So I use these tools for, like, obviously not only the pink Speedy Carve for lino. I've also used it with MDF blocks. If you're going to be doing them with MDF, you have to sharpen them a little bit too after maybe 30 or 45 minutes of straight use. And if you're going to be carving into MDF blocks, please wear a mask, because the dust from them, it's basically glue and nasty stuff and wood chunks, and you don't want to be inhaling that. How are we carving out around the circle? Good question. Here we go.
Real quick, Miles, before you get into that, I just want to be clear. You're talking about the linoleum that's mounted to the MDF box.
No, I'm talking about straight up, lovely, soft, nasty MDF.
Oh, Well, I've never carved into MDF and did not know that was a thing. So, okay, good to
It's
know.
a thing because some people like it because there's no wood grain, so it prints flat,
Wow.
which is really kind of nice. Like before you print it, you varnish it and you seal it because it's also very absorbent and it does not like moisture.
Got it.
But I loathe carving maple ply by hand. Like it's just not satisfying. MDF is a mid-density fiberboard, I think it
Yep.
stands for. It's good for a multitude of cheap things, but it's not necessarily a quality product for building furniture or anything with, but it's more affordable compared to like a hardwood. Just make sure you seal it with a varnish before you start printing with it.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for clarifying because I
Hey,
was
no
like, oh
problem.
my God, I've never protected myself when I've carved linoleum attached to MDF, but you were talking about straight
Just
up.
the MDF, just the MDF. It's essentially compressed glue and nastiness from a
Do you
factory.
have a piece with you? In your, to show it to us?
It looks like this is a piece of the camel tan lino.
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
this is what it looks like. It
Yeah,
doesn't-
that's what I was talking about.
Yeah.
You can
But-
just carve right into the wood.
Yep.
Yes, so you can draw on it with a pencil,
Oh,
and then make sure you're varnishing it because it will absorb your inks.
and these tools will work on wood.
They will. You're gonna make them dull faster
Yeah.
than you may think. But I like to use the MDF because it's if you want to increase your scale. Like it's not good for little small things, but it's good if you want to do a life-size woodblock carving, for example.
How do you sharpen the blades?
Oh man, that's another demo.
Is it? Okay.
There are kits that you can
Okay.
get that Speedball has that have little stones and fine sandpaper and a little bit of oil, I believe, or water. And you're basically pulling them at an angle consistently. And it doesn't take long and it's relatively simple. So unless you're investing in big expensive blades, I wouldn't worry too much. 9 times out of 10, I just get another little blade set because they're pretty affordable that way.
Right.
Yeah, you got options.
Cool.
So when you're carving away, like for example, outside of the circle, I'm just going to do straight pushes. I'm back with the number 2 because you know it's my favorite. And I'm just pushing out to the perimeter. And eventually when you keep doing this, you'll get the groove, you'll get the feeling, you'll get depth, and it will start to look like muscle structure, back to like anatomy class. And I think it's really kind of nasty and interesting, but it's satisfying to also see. So notice what's happening when I'm carving off the perimeter. So you're getting those straight lines, and then it's getting soft at the edge. And that's where I'm going to suggest that either you go with it and love it and make it part of your design, or you flip it back the other way and then you carve inward towards it. So traditionally and historically, if you didn't dig deep enough and didn't carve deep enough, and it started printing on your paper or on your fabric, that's called chatter. And you can use that to your benefit and use it as a texture, but it's really difficult to replicate because it kind of builds a little bit over time. So if you want this whole area outside of the circle to be a pure white, go deep, go 50%. But that's also another reason why I'm suggesting you get the 2-inch brayer, the 2-inch roller, because we can really control exactly where we're rolling on such a small block. If you have a really big one, you may accidentally ink up deep that area because your rollers are rubber, right? So they're going to have a little bit of a sponge and a little bit of a give to them. But the 2-inch makes me happy, and that's the one I'll demonstrate with you shortly. Yeah, your Speedy Carve definitely will not wear down your blades. It's very soft, and I have never had to replace any of my blades while carving pink Speedy block, or the blue for that matter, or the yellow.
may I ask you a question?
Always.
Okay, I wanted to do some trees that have branches, like the winter, no leaves, just trees and branches. So it's almost impossible to carve around the trees with branches. Because you have to get in between all the, so what I'm saying is if I just carve out the trunk and the branches, when I print it, it'll show up by default, correct?
You will have some beautiful trees in the snow.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay, because
You,
that would be very hard to do otherwise, wouldn't it?
it would, absolutely. So it comes down to maybe making a less detailed design.
Yes.
Or if you had all the patience in the world, which I don't have, I think you could do it. And I think that would be a really good example of where you might want to eventually use that number one tool.
Yes.
I've seen some really beautiful, intricate ones, and yeah, that's a lot of work.
I want to show you something that I saw online. I'm going to put it up and see how did they do this? Wait a minute. Can you see it?
I can kind of see it. Well, here's the other option for you. Like that looks like a cyanotype potentially. Yeah, that's going to be my guess. I think that is either a cyanotype because of that blue, which is like a photographic process with using light
Oh,
to expose an image to a blue surface, and then you wash away your
Oh.
exposed area. But remember, you've also got opaque white inks. So you could print white ink onto a blue surface and get a very similar result.
oh, okay, great. Thank you very much.
Hey,
Thank
no
you. Sorry to
problem.
take your time.
Hey, no
I'll
problem.
mute myself now.
This is kind of what printmakers do. Like they say yes to everything, like, yes, we can do that. And then they figure out how to do it after the fact. Should we maybe another 5 minutes and then I'll dive into Inkland? Does that sound reasonable? All right. I saw some thumbs and nodding. Okay. What printy stories can I tell you? Hey, so back to technology and my interest. I've been chucking these into a laser engraver, which is, I still need to research a little bit about the fumes that I'm causing because of that. But I'm kind of getting photographic results because of it, and results to be shown soon.
I want to see. We can't see. We can't see.
I'm sorry, can you give me a few more days with my research?
Okay, fine.
I chuck everything into the laser and I try my best not to knock out everybody in the vicinity because of the fumes. Like that's obviously very important, but also the certain fumes that could come off of it could clog the equipment and the laser and the lens. And we don't want to do that, right?
Is there a particular reason that you're sticking Speedy Carve in the laser engraver as opposed
because
to...
I haven't done it. I haven't done it yet.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I do wood blocks all the time. Like that's I got that down pat. I used to do a whole bunch of wooden spoons, for example. And someone is requesting, can you hold up your finished carved piece? Yes, I can. So keep in mind, this one is ever so slightly stained because I have printed it for the demo. It looks a little reddy blue because that's what I was printing with. So notice how this kind of looks like this area here kind of looks like, I don't know, Grey's Anatomy books. Not crazy deep, but just to give you an idea. And I didn't clean it properly, bad Myles.
Is this going to come up enough? Can you see it?
Let me click through, see if I can find you. Where are you? Where are you?
Joan.
Joan, yeah.
I'm just clicking through little tiny. Where are you? Sorry, bear with me 1 second here.
No, it's okay.
Hi, Joan. Can you put
Hi.
it right up closer for me? A little higher? Yep, I see drop shadows. That is definitely deep enough. Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
No, it's no problem. No problem at all. So I'll just kind of slowly start talking about inks, just so we don't waste any of our printing and inking time. I'm pretty traditional when it comes to my ink preferences for different processes. So like for my etchings, I always love using oil-based traditional inks because they're just so saturated and they're so sexy and they're just so, they're gorgeous, right? So you've got Hanco and you've got Graphic Chemical and Gamblin and a whole bunch of other Charbonnels, of course, are kind of the creme de la creme. What's the other one that I'm just transferring to for Intaglio? It's the British one. I'll think of it later on. It doesn't matter. I also have used the Akua water-soluble water cleanup soy-based ones. There was a bit of a learning curve for me using them, and I can say now that I respect them and I like using them for certain processes. So I like them for their school friendliness, their home studio friendliness, the water cleanup, and their colors are pretty good. They're pretty luscious. What I find that I need to do a lot with them is I need to add a lot of the Meg carb to stiffen them up, so they react a lot more like a traditional etching ink would for me, if that makes sense. They're a little runny for my personal preference, but I can fix that. I can modify them.
What's Meg Carb?
Magnesium carbonate.
Okay.
It just stiffens them up. So traditionally, it's just in a powder form. Akua has its soy version.
I've used Akua, however you say it, for monotype prints.
Perfect for that. They're painterly, but that water cleanup, you can't really beat that. That's pretty impressive.
I love it.
The block printing inks that we're using today are designed for fabric. For example, the blue one, which is what I'll start with today, which means that within 24 hours, they're 100% dry to the touch, which is great. And they're a little more opaque. They're meant for fabric, so they sit within the fibers. And I think it's within, double checking my notes, within 7 days, they're completely cured.
7.
Which is pretty great. So you don't have to worry about heat setting them, but do not wash them until after the 7 days. You could get a little risky and heat set them by chucking them in the dryer at a high setting for half an hour, but why rush it? Just don't rush it.
I have actually ironed them, and I did read somebody's feedback that actually it was better to do that. Somebody had, and that's why I did iron it. It seems to be working well.
Yeah, like I think out of habit, I do that with experience using different types of fabric inks, and it gives me a little extra layer of security that I'm doing everything right and it's not going to wash away. However, if you wash any fabric ink, you're probably going to lose between 8 to 10% of the saturation of that color. You know, unless you're using something really industrial, like a discharge ink for textiles and mass-produced items, but you don't want to use those inks at home or in your studio. They're really quite bad for you. So I should talk a little bit about inks in general. So with Speedball, they've got their fabric ones, their ones specifically for screen print. They're all over the place. I grew up learning with the screen print acrylic based water inks from Speedball, and I'm still using them today. I think I'm just a fan of them. They seem to be quite versatile. I like the transparency of the colors because all of my personal work has a lot to do with layers. And could I print, 4 layers and get multiple colors from overlapping? It's all about making it look like more work than it actually is. That's always been kind of my go-to. So I do like that there's CMYK, there's cyan, yellow, magenta, and black process colors in particular. They're meant to be layered, so they are transparent. Having said that, There's also the professional range that they have of block printing inks. Got one right over here, which you may want to, is for relief. And I spilled some goo on it, so apologies. But look for the skull. This black is actually quite gorgeous, and I use it a lot for my wood blocks. So you might want to give that a try if you're really liking the printing process. I will use oil-based for paper and for fabric. And then just give myself a lot more time to let that oil dry, because I just feel like it'll give you a slightly better result. But there are lots of benefits from not using oil-based inks. It's just whatever you're comfortable with in your studio setup. So when I start printing with this blue, I'm also going to be mixing in the transparent base, which is also called extender. Think of it as you're extending your color. Yours will look a little different than mine. You've got a bigger one, I think, which I'm jealous about. I use a lot of this, and it's kind of like your water to Kool-Aid powder ratio. I might use 50% of this and 50% of the pure pigment from the color tube as my starting layer, because I want that white of my fabric to come through, and that's how my color is getting lightened. I'm not adding white pigment to the blue because that will make it pastel. If you want pastel, that's how you do it. But it also makes your ink opaque, so it will cover up anything underneath it. If you want more of that natural blue to come through, transparent base is your friend. I use this more than color. So as we gear up for starting with inking, I ink on glass surfaces normally. You could also use a plexi surface. You could also use a large plate, like a dinner plate, as long as it's flat. You could use any type of plastic surface that you don't mind putting a bit of ink on, but it cleans up with water. So you could use your kitchen counter. If it's not textured, like don't put it on like a beautiful slab of granite or anything. Lino surfaces are great. Big tiles are really good too, like backsplash tiles, for example. They're easy to clean up, they're stable, they're flat. Flat's important, okay? So I'll be printing on just this little piece of plexi that I have sitting around. And it's small enough for me to chuck right into the sink. So that's another reason why I like using this. I'm just gonna get my little station set up and ask me questions as we go.
Would a ceramic surface work?
It sure would. I'm gonna tape mine down because I feel like I like to secure things and I don't like things moving around, because we're gonna become robots as soon as we get the technique down. And I'm gonna be using my number 2-inch brayer. Gorgeous brand new one. Top, oh, I used it already. Anyhow, you usually look nicer than that. But the box looks new, right? I use my products, that's a good sign. Note that all of the brayers have a little ledge, a little feet. So you should never keep them roller side down. Over time, that will dent the roller. Flip it up. And it also keeps your surface clean, so you're not moving ink around all over the place. So flip it up, okay?
You just blew my mind.
That's why they pay me the big bucks, Tara.
It clearly is worth it. I'm gonna let them all know.
Okay, so we got the block, we got the 2-inch, I've got the blue I'm gonna start with, and I've got my extender, my transparent base. I've also got a clean, flat, gorgeous surface where I'm going to be stretching out my piece of cotton. I'm not worried about deep creases. Wait, let me rephrase that. I am worried about deep creases. You do want to iron those out. Little ones like this, that's not the end of the world. We're going to be flattening it. We're going to be heating it up maybe later on or ironing it. Not worried. A deep crease will be problematic. So iron that sucker, okay? So remember we talked about at the very beginning, there's a good printing side versus the hem where the hem is like folded over. The folded over side I am putting down, but print on whatever side you're comfortable with. I'm looking for any imperfections, any little hairs or fluff. Just get it off now because that will act kind of as a resist, which might be really beneficial. If you wanted to put down something to cover and to keep it white, you could do that. You could tape off sections. You could put down shapes. You know, it's kind of like stencil making 101. How is our view? Can people see things relatively okay if I leave it
Yes.
here? Okay, great. So I have a reputation of being nice and controlled with my ink, and I'm gonna try my best to like instill in all of you to keep your ink slab, which is where we're gonna start to roll it out. Keep your slab tight and keep it kind of condensed. If you keep your ink condensed, your ink will stay fresh and stay open longer. And when I say open, that essentially means it'll stay usable for longer and it won't dry out on you. So I'm going to take some of the extender, the clear base first, squidge a little bit out on the side. It should look kind of like bland oatmeal. And if it's a little runny when it comes out at first, that's fine. We're going to mix it all together anyhow. Then I'm going to put out some of my blue. I might go for like a 50-50. Like transparency is essentially up to you. But I do suggest you add transparency if you intend to do a second layer in a different color and a different direction over top. So my goal now is to cover this entire surface in the tiled pattern blue, 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 blue over absolutely, how's that? Over absolutely everything. And then let this kind of set for a little tiny bit and then clean off my block, which we'll talk about in a moment. Change the color, rotate the block, and then overprint in the exact same location again. You do not have to do that. Maybe you just want the one color. Challenge yourself, do a 2-color. Challenge yourself in your own time, do a 3rd color. Like, how complicated do you want this to be? Totally up to you. And I do think that the more simple your design is, the more effective it will be. So I could also spend hours just talking about ink mixing and mixing ink and perfect colors. But we don't have time for that. Give it a good mix in there, flip it around a little bit. You can use a paint brush. You can use a paint palette knife. I use these big ones, putty knives, but give it a good mix. I'm picking it up, I'm smacking it back down again. If I was using an oil-based ink, for example, I would be adding some cobalt dryer or some Japan dryer, just so it dries within 24 hours as opposed to 5 days. But thankfully, we're using a very fast drying ink today with the block inks. So this is a really small block and a really small brayer that we're using. I'm not going to get too finicky about how you end up getting the ink onto your brayer, but just know that traditionally you would scoop up what's called a bead and you would spread out a bead of ink smoothly. Okay. And then this is what you would take from when you're moving your brayer around. You could also have what's called a well, and you put the majority of your ink kind of up on the top. And that's what you would go back to refresh your slab. So your well, your slab, and you're kind of adding a bead. And the thing we're going to try for is just to keep things consistent. And yep, it's going to be a little meticulous, but if you want perfection, that's what you got to do. Notice how I'm kind of rolling in different directions to make my slab even. We're looking for a texture like an orange peel. And we're kind of listening for a sound of sizzling bacon. So I don't know if you can hear this, but let's try. Anything?
No,
Well, pretend it's bacon.
you need to mic your ink next time, Miles. And there's a couple of questions about the extender base. So have you mixed it in yet? And what's the ratio?
I did 50-50 for this, and I have mixed it in. You can't really tell, and that's how potent and pure the blue is. So 9 times out of 10, I am always adding some type of a transparent base, especially when I'm overlapping colors. I have mixed it in. And I don't know if you can see this very well, but that's the texture you're looking for, that orange skin I was talking about. It should not look like peaks. It should not look like Mount Kilimanjaro, meringue, none of that. If you have too much ink on there, make your slab bigger or roll it off on a piece of paper and come back. If you've got too much ink, you're going to lose some of those fine details. All right. I'm not using a lot of pressure, but I'm looking for my slab to be smooth and flat and kind of consistent. And then when I go to the block, because it's so small, I can just focus it on different areas, and you can ink it in different directions as well. Just try to do something consistent once you get into a kind of a groove with it. I like to push in one direction. So I'll push like on all the stripes, for example, and then I'll go and I'll refresh my brayer, and then I'll go at a different direction, refresh my brayer, one direction. Notice how I'm not going forward, back, forward, back, forward, back. That's kind of useless because your brayer is in the same location each time. So you're putting down ink and then you're picking it up and putting it down and picking it up again. It has to be moved around. I'm refreshing each time. And I can look at little areas and I can see when it's covering nicely. And I'm not going crazy fast because if you start rolling over it quickly, you actually whip up the existing ink that you just put down on your block. So I'm being really gentle with it. But then again, that's a really nice trick. If you've got too much ink on your block, it looks like lots of peaks, roll it fast. And that should take some off for you. How we doing? Feet? So because of this design that I made, there's lots of places to put your fingers. You may want to consider with your future designs, if you carved nothing around the perimeter, how are you going to pick up this block? Okay, you could account for how are you going to grab it. I can do 2 fingers really easily with this one. Down the road, if you're really getting into this, the stamping kind of motion that we're doing, you could mount these blocks onto a clear piece of acrylic, for example, and put like little handles on it for you. That might be nice. Whatever you feel like doing. So starting in the middle of your 13 by 13 piece of fabric, you could either do it smack in the middle, off on an angle, a 45-degree, and whatever you want. The human eye gravitates to try to find 90-degree angles and 180-degree lines. So what I suggest to make a successful repeat of any kind, rotate it 45 degrees, put it on a bit of an angle. It adds versatility and interest to your pattern and your design. I'm going to start in the middle. I'm putting it down. Once it is down, do not move it around because you will move and smudge your image, obviously. I know where my circle is. I know where my lines are. I know where to put the focus and the attention. So the circle is over here. The lines are right there. I like to use my knuckles to do a gentle little rocking with it. You shouldn't have to push very hard if you inked it properly. You can also use the burnisher if you want that grip, that different option for how to give it a little bit of pressure, okay? I don't use this a lot for the small blocks. I use it often for a big block, for a big area. But I'm doing a gentle rocking motion with it. And I don't trust it completely, and I'm still gonna go in because I know I've got details on the edge, perimeter, following where my design is. And I might give that circle a little more push because I want it to print as flat as it can. The first one may be a little light. If you inked it properly, it shouldn't, but we'll see what happens, okay? Remember, this is a hand printed piece. Peel and reveal from one corner. Try not to grab it straight up. Nice and transparent. I think I generally like it to be a little bit darker than this. So you could go back in and add some pigment. If you have all of the eyeballing power in the universe, you could try to overprint that again, but I wouldn't risk it. I would go with it, okay? I'm gonna continue the process. I might add a little more ink to my slab as we go. Added a little more. I always err on the side of not having enough ink. And it's usually detrimental. But I don't like inking it heavy because it gives me so many problems where I feel like if it's light, I can usually fix it. Feet. Okay. I'm gonna line up my design. Again. You know, you shouldn't be building up a sweat when you're doing this. It should be relatively relaxing and calming for you. Let me know if you're not. I don't know how to help you though. Just 2 knuckles. I've got quite a few colleagues and even some students who have, you know, they don't have the same mobility issues that some of the other ones do. And doing the 2 knuckle thing just doesn't work for them. So this may be a really good opportunity to use that hard roller that we were talking about before for getting even pressure rolling on this surface. Just be careful not to fly off the edge because that might make your plate just kind of, your block kind of jump a little tiny bit. Peel and reveal. Oh, it's darker. Oh, inconsistent. C+ for Myles today. Whatever. We're going with it.
Myles, do you have like a favorite proofing paper that you use, or just kind of like whatever scrap you have around?
I always do it, well, if I was doing like an edition, for example, I would always proof on the paper that I'm doing my edition on.
Makes sense.
That's a really good idea. You know, like go on to a little scrap of whatever you have kicking around. If you're printing on paper, stay on paper. If you're printing on fabric, stay on fabric because they do respond differently.
Very
We're
smart.
kind of knowing. Maybe I'll try to be like really smart and overprint that. Risky business. Should he do it? He's doing it. He's doing it. We might get a nice little double image. You don't need glasses. You just need to do better than I did. How's that? Yeah, not bad. We're fine.
Nice job, because there's now a chorus in this room of all of us saying I've never successfully been able.
You know, go with it. This is hand printed, right?
No,
I
I
get
love
quite a
it.
few students who
Great.
are very upset that they can't get the skinniest, purest, perfect black line imagery, graphic quality. And I'm like, you know, this is a fine art class, right? This isn't illustration or design. And I get it, but you're gonna have to really let go of that. So I'm gonna continue on and ask away anything I can assist with. I can backtrack, I can repeat, I can start over. Please don't make me start over, but I can if you want me to. Let me know how I can help you.
So Miles,
Hi.
hi, mine is coming out extremely light. Did that mean I put too much transparent base or
It is possible, or maybe
not haven't inked it enough?
it's hard to tell. Does the consistency of your block look like orange peel?
Yeah.
Then maybe it's too much transparency. Let's add
Yeah.
a little more of the blue.
Yeah,
That would be my suggestion.
just add a little more blue.
A little more blue. Yeah, it's pretty potent and it goes a long way.
Yeah. I'll try that.
Give it a try, and if that doesn't work, then it's definitely the ink quantity on top of the Speedy Carve block.
Yep.
Yeah, the Speedball inks are really nicely pigmented. There's a lot of color and they do go a long way.
I did a residency years and years ago after my undergrad in Alberta. And I remember that I managed to ship the gallon containers of the screen print ink to that residency. And I ended up using a fraction of them while I was there, but I still made a multitude of prints. And I just donated them about 2 years ago, still 2/3 full, those buckets, to a college in New York. So they go a long way, especially if you're using the transparent base, which I heavily suggest most people do. When you get to the edge, don't be afraid to fly off the edge of the surface onto whatever you're printing on, just like the table. So if you've got some paper underneath, great. If you don't, it cleans up with water. So you don't have to really worry too much about it. Unless you're printing on, I don't know, your grandmother's antique kitchen table or something, you might not want to do that.
We have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Carolina, can you go with a brush with the paint on top?
You know, I don't necessarily advise that you do that. Look, I messed up my repeat pattern. Thanks, everybody. No kidding. I don't advise it because you can't keep it as consistent as a flat roll. But yes, if you want something more more painterly, more gestural, more like a monotype, why not? You know, you could mix colors within the circle and do a beautiful swirl. Just don't make it too thick. Because if it's too thick, it's going to get patchy when you transfer it over, and it could squidge out and ruin your crisp circle portion, for example.
Awesome. And then Ginger wants to know what's the best way to clean up tiny fragments of Speedy Carve on the surface of the design. What picks up the tiny pieces?
I'm always like flipping my block over and doing that. But if you have a lot of tiny pieces, I'm going to suggest you make longer carves. And that's not meant to be like a dig or anything at you. But if you're doing tiny, tiny, tiny little cuts, just go in there for a more confident kind of gouge. But if you are going in to kind of cut out little tiny areas that are the chatter that I was talking about before, so maybe there's an area now that is inking that I don't want it to be inking, literally go on in. I could go in right now and edit this design. I'm going to carve out this part right here. And then you can get it stuck in the trough. And that's a nice little way just to kind of flick it off to the side. Hope that helps.
If you had a lot of stuff, could you just rinse it off? I mean, would that be
But if there's a lot of stuff cut, it should just fall off naturally, right?
right? Okay. Mhm.
But you could rinse it, absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't scrub it, and this comes down to cleanup in a little tiny bit, but I would not scrub it with anything abrasive. Like anything in the print land, if you use anything abrasive, you're creating a texture and ink gravitates towards texture. So just a regular cellulose sponge or just your fingertips. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. What is the best surface to place the textile on for printing? That's a good one. Make sure you get a tight print, I guess.
Well, something small like we're doing now, I wouldn't be too fussed about it. But in the ideal situation, you would have a rubber semi-spongy matte surface where you could pin down and ever so slightly pull your fabric tight. And that's exactly what they do when they're doing large scale fabric, like wallpapers and repeat patterns for fabric in general, for screen printing and for block printing, just like this. So it may be a little bit of an investment, but you can actually pin into it. And if you look at how, a really great example, you look at how they do the Hermes scarves, HERMES, those fancy dancy designer scarves. They have a vacuum system that holds down their fabric. But that's the ideal, throw some money at it situation. You could also use a light textile spray adhesive if you wanted it to not move at all. And that's repositionable, and it also washes out really easy. I'm gonna do this for a minute.
Awesome. Thank you.
Back to tools. What is the next step from Speedball carving tool? The next step up. Uh-oh.
I'm going to respond to Lori privately. All right.
Do you know the
Myles?
answer to that?
I have an answer. I think Speedball is a professional quality product, but but this is Speedball's event, so we're not going to mention another vendor in this event. So I'm going to DM back to Lori what I know, and hopefully that's adequate.
Like I have
Myles?
a multitude of tools that I use for carving different surfaces. And if I
That's a
wanted to
good
do
point,
something,
too.
yeah, and if I wanted to do something harder, I would definitely upgrade. And I know Speedball wouldn't mind. Like they're like, yeah, I use different tools for different materials. A hardwood, like a maple hardwood, cherry, for example. Like I'm using chisels and mallets, and they don't sell chisels and mallets, and I need them. So yeah.
Myles, could we see some of your projects that you've done so we can see what we can work towards?
Yeah,
Maybe.
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, I would love to see what you've done.
Shameless plug then. Why don't I can I give you like a website and Instagram?
Oh, you can give us anything you want.
Squirrel Pigeon Fish is my Instagram.
Oh, wait, let me write that down.
And squirrelpigeonfish.com is the website. I just had a solo exhibition at the York County of Art Council in Rock Hill, South Carolina, where there's multi-plate lithographs on display. No, they just came down. Multi-plate lithographs, screen prints, reams of repeat patterns on fabric, but they were produced with a sublimation process. I also did a lot of etchings on copper, multi-plate, Shinkolei processes, some photopolymers, which is a fusion of like etching and screen print kind of together. I don't think I had any of my laser wood blocks on display at that exhibition, but they are on my website. And if anybody happens to be by Charlotte, you're welcome to pop by and see what's going on here. Like we have open door policy for our studios. Have you tried ironing the fabric to freezer paper to stabilize it? Nope, I've never tried that. Sounds cool. Yeah, I've never tried that. No.
Does
cool.
it stick? That's really interesting. Okay.
I don't think I would use wax paper for obvious reasons, but freezer paper, gosh, no idea. I know you can get certain fabrics that are like a semi-sticky, like a muslin or a like traditional tarlatan for doing etching, which is basically starched cheesecloth. That might help, but I haven't had a lot of problem with things moving around, especially for a process. Like this is a pretty basic, right? Like this will make you some beautiful stamps and repeat
Thanks, Emily.
patterns. Oh, thank you. But yeah, if you want to upgrade, you got to upgrade a few things. And I think that would be your working surface, having something you can pin into with little T-pins.
Oh, well, that makes sense now why it's the quilters. It's a big thing with quilters. I mean, I would, if it flattens it out and it comes right off,
I
you
don't
know,
see why not. Yeah. Ah, good question. I was just gonna say, we've got roughly 20 minutes left. So one thing I want to point out, if you have your ink going all over the place, and I bet you anything that 75% of you do, and I don't want to see it because it offends me. You're spreading your ink out so much, you are giving it so much time and space to dry out. Scrape it back up and get it all in one beautiful little clump again. A top tip, you could, if you're having a problem with it drying out, if you add a little more fresh ink, it keeps it fresh and it keeps it going and it keeps it happy. If you have a big roller or a big image, it's going to dry out pretty fast, so you got to move it. You could add a pinch of glycerin to the ink to keep it open and usable for a little bit longer. I don't have to do it if I'm using the block this small. But on a bigger one, yes. And I like to take my time. Like I need to make sure everything's inked perfectly and my paper's ready to go and the pressure's right, blah, 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 right? So it's good for smaller blocks, but keep your slab tight. If you're getting to the stage where you're like, oh, done with the blue, yeah. If you're done with the blue and if you printed your whole layer and you want to chill for a little bit, scrape it up as much as you can and it goes straight into the garbage. You could try to save it. I usually find it's not worth it, which is why I just put out a little small quantity at a time. Scrape it up as much as you can. I may as well just do it right now. This is a show and tell after all, right? Here we go. So
that it is.
I've got all the ink on my brayer, right? So get off as much as you can onto another surface, usually a scrap piece of paper. Okay, that's looking pretty good already. I have a lot on my spatula, a lot on my slab. I'm going to scrape it up, whack it down onto another piece of paper. And because we haven't added anything toxic to it, we haven't added any drying chemicals, that's usually oil and only in oil-based processes. This can go right into the garbage at this point. Get off as much as you can from your tools. And I've already printed this, so quite a bit of it came off. You can smack it again if you need to get off some extra. But you're right, if you leave that sitting there and it's thin with ink, it will start to dry. And then if you put fresh on top, it might start to flake a little tiny bit. So you have to find the sweet spot. If it starts to flake and you're not done printing, take it and wash it. And this is the exact same process of what you're going to do when you're completely done. Right now, I'm going to spritz it with water because my sink is too far away. It's just water cleanup. And I use a little bit of dish soap and I use either a cellulose sponge and or my fingers just to move it off the surface. It will stain. It will get stuck in some of the grooves. Doesn't matter. It will look worse than it will actually print, but you can use this over and over and over and over again, as long as you don't, tear it accidentally. So I usually have like a little spray bottle with me. I love these diffusers, for example. They're just super fine and misty. Spraying it, spraying it, spraying it, spray in my roller. If I was right beside a sink, I would throw this in the sink. Like that's how easy this cleanup is. And you can see it's already starting to break down. I usually use a rag because they're a little more versatile, I suppose. But 1, 2, there's my knife perfectly cleaned, gorgeous. And I would go around the perimeter maybe 2 or 3 times just with water. And that's already doing a really, really good job. This will be stained. So that gorgeous color that it started, it will never go back to that unless you hit it with a mineral spirit. And who wants to use that? Well, technically I do, but I'm not allowed to in this demo. Back to the slab, super quick. And that's why I think this is really good for home studios, really good for school environments. Like when I had those 120 kids, there is no way I would have used an oil-based ink to do that process. And ink is already just flying off this. So I'll hold that up just to show you what I mean. So there's the inky side. It just comes off really nice, okay? That's even without using soap. I would dry it off with another rag or a paper towel and then just let it air dry, set it aside, and you're good to start printing with it again. Your fabric textile, you don't have to wait 24 hours. It should dry a little bit faster. You could hit it with a hair dryer if you just want to keep on going with the process. But if you've got time, do wait, because there will be a slight difference.
We do have a couple of questions.
The paint mixture is thick. Can water be spritz in? Yeah, I don't advise it because you'll be diluting your pigment. And I would rather you just kind of, maybe every 3 prints, you add a little more fresh from your pile onto your slab. And you become really robotic that way. So you're like 3 passes over the circle, back to the slab, 3 passes over the lines, back to the slab, print, add some fresh ink to my pile, repeat. And if you can keep that consistent, like that natural kind of refreshing as you go, you shouldn't have any problems.
Awesome. And Marta wants to know, their white area has a line left at the edge, hard to cut cleanly off the edge. Any advice about cutting block edges?
Yeah, so if you're cutting off the edge right to the perimeter and over, turn it around 180 and carve back in towards the center of the block. So like you're carving from the perimeter inward. Does that make sense?
I think it does. And someone asked, I think they were asking if you can print on Tyvek.
Tyvek.
It's like that, it's a plastic, so I would use the oil base, I think. But
Yeah. So yeah, anything like if you print on any surface that is not porous, you won't get happy results. Like they'll look good for a little while and then they'll dry and they'll flake off because they have nothing to grip onto. Unless you're going to seal it afterwards. So you're going to hit it with a clear coat of something.
What's
Yeah,
going
feel
on?
good. Or you could hit it with some resin, for example, if you want to get into resin fun. I always do. But it like if you're printing on glass or plastic, it will just flake off over time. Anyone have blue on their face yet? Yupo paper? I've never tried it on Yupo. I know lots of my colleagues really enjoy that. I don't have a lot of experience with it. Thanks, Deborah. That's nice.
I think you could get away with it on Yupo because the surface, you know, you would just have to be probably pretty careful about the amount of ink that you use, right?
Like, yeah, kind of like anything. Like sometimes I do demonstrations for people and I use the fabric ink for fabric, and then we also keep printing on paper. because it's still an ink at the end of the day. And yes, it's designed for fabric, but it also looks really good on paper too.
Right.
So, you know, and it's the same with screen printing land as well. Like you've got tons of options, really.
Any tips on overprinting with the second color?
That's where your transparent base is a necessity unless you want to cover up your first color. So I would definitely go for something like a 50-50 blend again. And I would rotate your block consistently 90 degrees or 180. So I wouldn't go directly over top in the same direction, like so.
Do you do anything on the back of the block to indicate the direction or to make that
Yeah.
easier so you don't, I always screw it up. So.
I think that'd be really smart because look what I just did, obviously.
Right?
Yeah, north, south, east, west, up, down, left, right. That's a excellent idea.
Yeah. I feel like I would need that.
Is there a film that can run through the laser printer and transfer to the block? Yeah, if you could use the clear film pieces of acetate, the ones that accept toner. I think toner transfers really well to these. The laser ones, I'm not entirely certain. I've never given that a go. So that's kind of a wishy-washy answer for you. But I do know you need to use one of the transfer acetates that have a little bit of a tooth to it to hold enough of the ink to transfer, or else it just smudges and goes all over the place and never dries. And make sure you double check that acetate you're putting through because some of it may melt. And that's never fun for anybody.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. Ran away from the situation.
Oh, can you repeat instructions for setting after printing? I want to eventually wash and wear.
For setting up your printing, what do you mean? Sorry.
Setting the ink, I think is.
Oh, for setting the ink, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so your first layer, so the blue one we just did will dry in 24 hours. With this Speedball fabric ink, you don't have to set it. After 7 days, it becomes cured and you can wash it. I always give myself a little extra precaution and I might iron it. I might chuck it in the dryer. Definitely after 24 hours, just to give myself a little more reassurance. But you are still going to lose roughly 8 to 10% of any ink that I've found when you wash it. So you may want to put a little more bang and saturation into your color, knowing that it might be pushed back a tiny bit. Oh, thanks, Kate. Hey, there's a party at the McCall tonight, just FYI. There's an open house, open studios, food truck. I'm hoping people are in the area. You're probably not, but it's going to be a nice party here.
Well, that's a good question. You know, probably not. Probably not. And you're North Carolina, right?
At the moment, I
Yeah.
need to put down roots somewhere. I don't think it's going to be here. Don't tell anybody. But here we are for now.
Fair.
Do you lose any more ink when washing linen as opposed to cotton? I think it has to do with the weave of the fabric you're ultimately printing on. If you have an open weave, you're going to lose a lot more of the ink as it gets laundered. But if you have a tight one, 100% cotton, it's just, I feel like it grips onto it more and there's a little bit of staining. Like fabric inks are meant to stain and to set as opposed to sitting on top of the surface. So if you have a tight weave, you're going to have and smooth, you're going to have way more success.
I can't type a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So sorry for everybody. I know you want a controlled meeting. So would it be hot or cold? And wash, I'm assuming, that type of thing.
So are you talking about curing?
Yeah, after it's cured and you're gonna go wash it. Hot, cold water, hand wash, what kind after that? Probably hand wash.
Anything that's hand printed, I instantly kind of gravitate towards a cold wash. However, I have washed these with warm water and they've been absolutely fine.
Excellent, thank you.
But just, I don't push it unless I absolutely have to.
Thank you very much, it's great.
No problem. Like tote bags, for example, like they rarely get laundered at all. And sometimes I feel guilty because they look so nasty, but I always do a cold wash for those.
And that's exactly what it says on the back of the tube, Miles. So great job. It says printed fabrics can be laundered after curing for 1 week at room temperature. Cool water and mild soap is preferred when laundering. Awesome.
And see Sarah's comment about the 4-inch brayer versus the 2-inch, like for the size of blocks we're using right now, the 2-inch just gives me a little more control. The 4-inch is my go-to, but I'm usually working a little bit bigger than this. So, and because they're so affordable, like the ones, and I know a lot of brayers, I have a lot of the fancy to cash ones, other brands as well, like Hawthorne, for example, but these are so affordable. I do have two in every size that they come in, because I think they just go up to maybe 8 inches maximum. But you know, if you can get a 2, get a 4, see how it goes.
I think we had the 4 on the list because that's the most standard. So
It is. It's the most popular one for a reason, the most versatile one. And I also use it for, I don't know if anyone's doing any photo litho plates. I know that's a whole other story, a whole other ball game, but believe it or not, they work better than some of those big, fancy, gigantic, 2-hand big brayers. So those little 4-inch ones are great.
that one that you're holding in your profile pic, or is that a drum from something? What is
That's one of the biggest rollers that I used at my last job, which was
okay?
my favorite that I really wanted to steal and take with me.
Mm,
They would have known it was me.
yeah, kind of hard to stick that in your pocket.
I wanted the press actually instead.
Oh, that's the press you were talking about.
Well, the press was kind of behind me, a beautiful German offset press, which is just heaven to use. If you find one, you let me know. Can you show how to print the second color? Does the first color have to dry? The first color definitely has to dry, or else you'll be pulling off the blue. And I could overprint some. I just don't want to. I'm going to finish my sentence. I don't want to pull off the color. So if you want to rush the process, hit it with a hairdryer. 10 minutes. Rotate your block, change your color, ink it up the exact same way. Stamp over top. Rotate, rotate, rotate. I hope that's okay. Within 3 minutes.
And Codiflex.
If there's anything else I can help people answer later on about individual projects or process or things that are going weird, you're more than welcome to shoot me a little message through Instagram or through the website, whatever you prefer. I don't mind answering those questions for you. I still get messages from students from days gone by, which I love answering. I love answering technical questions. It's the printmaker in me. And thank you very much for having me.
Miles, you were amazing, and I hope you will join us again.
Hey, love to. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks.
you
Bye-bye.
too.
Bye,
Bye, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a
Miles.
great weekend. Thanks.
Thank you.